World War I soldiers in the trenches. We often think of war in terms of physical injuries, bullet wounds, missing limbs, blood, and bandages. But what happens when the scars aren't visible? When the injury is to the mind, to the soul? Hi, my name is Abhi, and in this presentation, I'll be exploring the evolution of how society has understood war trauma. From the days of World War I, shell shock, to today's diagnosis of PTSD. A lot of what I'll be referencing comes from the article Shell Shock to PTSD, A Century of Invisible Injury, written by Mary Catherine McDonald, Marissa Brandt, and Robin Blum. It breaks down how medical, social, and historical perspectives have shifted over the last 100 years and why we still don't fully understand trauma today. I'll be connecting this article with key themes from our course, like how society defines health, the role of stigma in treatment, gender expectations in medicine, and how evolving media and public narratives shape what we call normal and sick. In World War I, thousands of soldiers returned home unable to walk, speak, or even remember who they were. With no physical injuries at all, it confused doctors and terrified families. The term for this was shell shock. At first, scientists believed it came from the blast of nearby shells, but then soldiers who never faced explosions had the same symptoms. So what was really going on? This is where society made a dangerous mistake. When science failed to explain it, people turned to judgment. These men were labeled weak, cowards, broken. They were often abandoned by their very system that sent them to war in the first place. This photo shows how medicine was shaped by power, not empathy. It punished the weakness. One British doctor, Louis Yeeland, used extreme treatments like electrocution and burning to force speech back into mute soldiers. His theory that this man was simply failing to act like heroes. This ties into what we learned about toxic masculinity in war during the course. The ideal soldier was supposed to be emotionless, fearless, unbreakable. If you showed pain without a wound, you weren't just sick, you were less of a man. Yeeland's brutal methods weren't science, they were punishment disguised as medicine. And they reflect how deeply gender roles influenced medical treatment. These propaganda posters showed men how to act, not how to heal. We discussed in class how media and propaganda shaped the identity of soldiers as brave, strong, and noble. But that leaves no room for trauma. PTSD wasn't seen as a result of violence. It was seen as failure. And that stigma follows soldiers for generations. This connects with the course discussions we had around societal myths, like the hero soldier erased real pain. That same myth silences people today too. It wasn't until Vietnam that change really began. Soldiers came home mentally shattered. These weren't just protests, they were cries for recognition. It wasn't until Vietnam that change really began. Soldiers came home mentally shattered, and instead of hiding it, they fought for recognition. They became activists, demanding the truth to be heard. This connects to our course themes of social justice and voice. When institutions failed to speak up for them, veterans raised their own voice. And that's how PTSD finally got into the DSM in 1980. It shows how the change in law and psychology can come from below, from people forcing institutions to catch up to reality. Vietnam was a turning point, not just for PTSD, but for mental health awareness. In general, it pushed society to admit trauma is real, even if it's invisible. The DSM gave PTSD a name. The article I based this on was written by 3 scholars, argues that science still doesn't fully understand PTSD. Not just the biology of it, but the why. Why does trauma look different across time? Why were soldiers in World War I mute, but today's veterans are often depressed and angry? This proves what we learned in this course, that trauma is not just medical, it's social, it's historical. It changes depending on cultures and expectations. Even the official definition of PTSD has changed multiple times, showing how psychology has influenced by politics, gender, and social norms. This is a photo of a brain scan. The trauma goes a lot deeper. Today, PTSD is recognized in the brain scans and medical reports. That doesn't mean we've solved it. 22 veterans a day take their own lives. That's not just a statistic, that's 22 families shattered every single day. Many veterans still feel pressure to act tough, not to show weakness, just like in World War I. The shame is quieter now, but it's still there. The war may be over, but the battle inside the mind continues. Healing looks different to everyone, and true treatment respects that. New therapies like virtual reality, mindfulness, and even MDMA treatment are helping. But the article makes something clear. The best therapy is the one the person chooses. Because healing isn't just about science, it's about control, identity, self-worth. And that links directly to our discussions of resilience, self-determination, and power. When we talked about autonomy in healthcare, this is what it meant: empowering the patient to guide their own recovery. This image shows it all. 2 soldiers, 2 eras, 1 invisible battle. Think of how far we've come. From soldiers shocked into speaking, to soldiers in therapy talking freely. From forced silence to empowered expression. From shame to understanding. But PTSD is still evolving. It's like a mirror, reflecting not just trauma, but the way society responds to it. This whole course has shown me how systems, whether legal, political, or medical, often struggle to keep up with a human experience. Whether it was our assignments on mental health, gender roles, propaganda, or moral dilemmas, it's all connected. This course showed us that everything, even something as personal as trauma, is shaped by the society we live in. A candle for those who are still fighting. So what do we do now? We remember that every invisible wound is real, that trauma can't always be measured, that healing takes time, empathy, and listening. And maybe most importantly, we speak up for those who still can't. After reading Shell Shock to PTSD, A Century of Invisible Injury, and looking back at what we've learned throughout the course, one thing is clear. Trauma is more than just a medical issue. It's shaped by the time we live in, the systems we build, and the values we hold. Whether it's World War I soldiers being labeled cowards or modern veterans navigating in a confusing therapy system, this article helped me realize that PTSD and how we treat it is constantly changing. That's why continuing the question to study and listen is so important. The article ends by saying PTSD is a chameleon. And I think that's the best way to understand not just trauma, but health and illness as a whole. Thank you for listening.